Once again, welcome all. I am Dr. Tripti Sharma, the instructor of the CMOS VLSI design course. Again, I am here with the second lecture of this series. In the first lecture, we have discussed about that what are the basics of VLSI and even what are the introduction to VLSI, how the evolution took place, and what are the possible outcomes and the objectives of the course which we are carrying out in this semester. And what in deep we have also seen each and every topic which need to be covered under the CMOS VLSI design course. So now today we will be discussing about the basics of VLSI. Now when we say basics of VLSI, so firstly we have to understand about that how many categories are there in which the semiconductor devices are broken into. Now the segmentation of the semiconductor devices, it took place like this. It's a complete tree of the semiconductor devices where we started from the diodes, then we come to the transistor. Now transistor again has a series into it, but when we talk of the diodes, then we go to DTL, which is a diode transistor logic, and from the transistor we come to BJT first, and after BJT we came to FET. After the FET, firstly the junction field effect transistor came into picture, which has N channel and P channel type of a transistors into it. Later on we came to the MOSFET, which is now a very widely used device and a very popular one also. So the MOSFET is again categorized into NMOS depending upon at what type of a conducting channel it has. Then the PMOS and complementary MOS, which is a combination of NMOS and PMOS, named as CMOS. Then we have a gates, and from there we built up a ICs, and then in a IC we have earlier discussed that there are number of integration levels. So SSI, MSI, LSI, then VLSI. Now we are into ULSI or SLSI, and this is an endless journey. This area, which is built of a BJT transistors, from here also earlier we have implemented the logic gates, and then the ICs were being implemented, and then again we have categorized into SSI, MSI and LSI, but not into VLSI. This came into picture when the MOSFET transistor started replacing the BJT transistors from the on-chip applications. Now, when we are using a huge number of semiconductor devices, then the question arises, what is the basic behind them and how this MOSFET has suddenly taken so much of popularity among all others, and how it has replaced all other semiconductor devices. So first come about the trade-off between power, speed and area. These are the three terms which are totally related to each other. Means if suppose I will shrink the area, say I have to scale down the area, then it will affect the power. If the power will be affected, then that will affect the speed. So basically there is a trade-off between the three. Any one out of these three is getting reduced, then on the other hand it is increasing the other two. So that's why it's a biggest trade-off triangle between the area, power and speed in the digital VLSI design. So wherever the optimum result achieved, then the device is chosen. And if we talk of this trade-off triangle, then MOSFET fits into it. Whatever be the specifications which we need out of area, out of power consumption, the speed of the circuitry or the system, then MOSFET is okay to give all those specifications, and it completes those specifications. Next comes how this evolution takes place. Then it comes about again a new triangle is there, which is having a density, features, functionality. So basically this is what, if we want more number of features but we don't want to increase the size, then obviously if the feature is increasing, number of features are increasing in any of the system, and we want to have a reduced size of the system, then the density need to be increased. Means if the features are increasing, it means it will have a more number of transistors, but again we want that those more number of transistors should not have a large density. It should be reduced. So again there is a trade-off between two, and then again the trade-off is coming as the functionality. If we are increasing the number of features, then there is a question of on the functionality also. This may have a incorrect results. Maybe transistor will not work in a proper way. Its throughput may get changed or may get affected by more number of increasing features. So this is again a second triangle, trade-off triangle. So these two trade-off triangles are very important whenever we are designing any of the circuit in the VLSI technology. This is a general design flow. It is of the TTL logic. TTL is transistor logic. It is the most popular one with the BJT transistors. When the devices were made with the BJT transistors, when the chips were made with the BJT transistor, then this TTL logic is of the utmost importance. And in this TTL logic, this is the flow. Firstly, we have a design specifications, or we can say the demands or the feedback from the market, or the improvements in the devices, whatever needed. So those all are the design specifications, like how much be the voltage range, what can be the particular current, at what temperature the system should run, and what can be the possible input frequency, the output amplitude, the power consumption, the speed of the system. So these are all the design specification. Once the designer get this design specification, he used to develop a truth table. And if the truth table once developed for the particular function, then the Boolean expression is extracted out. And from this Boolean expression, then we come to the implementation part. And implementation has a three category. Logic minimization and the multi-level of logic optimization. And now this logic minimization, we all have studied about the Carnot maps. So this is a one technique in the TTL logic that by which we can do the logic minimization. Then cost and performance requirement, this should also be taken care of once implementing the circuit or the system. Then the available inventory. So this is the general design flow which earlier was carried out with the BJT designs. This is a one example of that. Suppose the first is the design specification. So in a design specification, a behavior of the system will be given with the certain other properties of this. Then at the second step, the truth table depending upon this design specification is made. Once the truth table will be made, the reduction of the expression is done with the help of the Carnot map, or it can be the Quine-Mikulski method or some other different methods also. And a designer will have a reduced expression, or we can say the minimized Boolean expression, by which we have to then generate a circuit out of this. Next, after coming to the reduced Boolean expressions, minimize of device or number of labels means we have to look for cost effective and a good performance system, which will have a minimum high speed also. It should also have a low power consumption. So this is the next level. Then available inventory is used to be examined. After that, equation is rewritten with the NAND implementation. As in the digital electronic design, or we can say at the time of the BJT implementation, NAND implementation is a more popular rather than NOR, because NAND is a one which has a low leakage current, and also it consumes a less power even. So the NAND implementation, and then the circuit or the system being designed. So this is the conventional or the traditional flow. But now when we talk of the VLSI, then there are something different categories in the VLSI. This one journal flow is not for all type of categories. It changes based on the category to category. So now, if I talk of the basics of these of the VLSI design, now today we are going to discuss about the introduction to this. A little bit history we are again going to discuss. It's very important because it's always give us a right path and a motivation to move further. Then why the VLSI, then different design styles of the VLSI, the design flow and the approaches. Now the VLSI. VLSI stands for Very Large Scale Integration, means it is the art of integrating millions of transistors on a single chip. So this is what the VLSI stands for. Now, if I talk of the history of the IC design, this is the first point contact transistor. This was made by the Germanium in 1947. This is the first transistor which was developed. And you can see the size of this transistor also, and the way the contact has been made, and obviously it's very difficult to pack it into a very sleek, or the simple packaging is problematic for this type of a device. And slowly the evolution took place. So when the evolution came into picture, the firstly we were using the vacuum tubes in the electronic field. Then the era comes for the transistors. Then slowly we move to the gates. And now it's a time of integrated circuits. And why these ICs become so popular? There is a long list. Few I have included over here. Like if we are working on the ICs, if we are integrating a system on a single chip, then it will give a high performance, reliability is high, small area is there, applicability is high, the low power consumption and power dissipation is there, cost reduces, which is a very big factor if we think from the users of the customer side. Then fast design time, like the design time means to design the circuit, to design the system, that is also the time consuming, that is also less in the case of an integrated circuit. And the simple design process, because the few set of steps are there which need to be carried out to design an entire IC. So this is how it evolves, and slowly the IC captured the overall market across the world. And everything or the every electronic gadget, electronic device, electronic system, it is now using these ICs as a part of that. Now, this is the progressive trend of the IC technology. If we talk of the again the different scales, like moving from SSI and coming to SLSI, which is a super large scale integration. These are some functions of this. Like when we were at the SSI, the implementation was done at the gate level. Op-amps were implemented, which are the operational amplifier. We have implemented some linear applications also. When the MSI came into picture, then registers, filters, such kind of applications were made. With the LSI, we were able to make the processors, the microprocessors and ADCs, the converters. With the inception of the VLSI, memory, computers, signal processors, these came into picture. Means the more advancement came into picture. Then with the ULSI, we come to the Pentium. Pentium 4 is the first which was made under the ULSI series. And then with the SI, dual core processor, quad core processor. Nowadays we are using Snapdragon and many other in the list. So in this way, we have increased the number of applications, or we can say the implementations also, with the increasing IC technologies. Now, if I talk of this IC era, what was in the 1960s and where we are now? In 1960s, if I talk of, IC was supposed to be of a two transistors and a one resistor. These were the components which were on a one single wafer of a silicon. But now we have a billions of transistors and other components along with the transistors mounted on or the fabricated on the silicon wafer. Size of the chip was more than required. Means it was very bulky. Every part of chip is utilized now. Means now we are utilizing each and every single portion of the IC, and still it is of a very small size. Earlier ICs were not able to deal with the complex functionality. They hardly were able to do one or two functions only, but now efficient in dealing with the complex functionality. Means we have a list of features or the functions which can be taken care by a single IC. Earlier the ICs which were made in the early 60s, or when the era of the IC began, then it had the excess power dissipation. Now the designers have have controlled this power dissipation of the chip by and large. The speed or the clock was in a kilohertz, means the speed was very slow. The circuit have a very slow speed, but now million of operations can be done just in a one click or in a 1 second. So this is what the we can say the expansion, you can say, or the increment in the technology, that how it is increasing day by day, and what are the benefits which we are including into this IC era now. Now this is evolution in the IC complexity as we are moving from the early stage of the IC fabrication and now we are coming to the 2020. Then this is how the complexity increases. Earlier we have started with the 10 transistors, then now we are coming to a 10 lakh or even more, and slowly we are getting a more precise, or we can say more complex processors with a very high speed, and number of features are implemented into it. So this is how the market is moving, or the world is moving from very fast, and we have evolved the IC era, and one benchmark has been established now. Now again discussing about the Moore's law, because when we are talking of IC, when we are talking of VLSI, and Moore's law will not be included, that's it is next to impossible, because this is what which has given the foundation of the VLSI industry. So now if I'm talking of the Moore's law, then it is stated that the number of transistors on a chip doubles about every 2 years. But it's not only about the number of transistors. There are some other trends also which we are following since the inception of the Moore's law. Like transistor count, number of transistors doubled every 2 to 3 years. Yes, this is the Moore's statement. Similarly, not only the transistor count, along with that clock frequency, this is also getting double in every 2.1 year. The feature size, like the gate length, is divided by 2 in every 5.5 years approximately. So there are number of things which are connected with the Moore's law. It is not only about the transistor. Along with the transistor, other parameters are also shrinked in the same fashion. Now see, this is a MOS transistor. This is a PMOS transistor, and this is a NMOS transistor. This channel means these are the source and drain area, diffusion areas, and the gap between these is known as a channel, from which we define the technology node also. So if I'm talking of say about say in 2002, we were at the 130 nanometer L. L means this is the transistor length. Transistor length means the gate length of the transistor, which is over here designed. This is distance between source and drain in a very rough way we can say. Otherwise, this L is known as a minimum feature size, which is allowable to be fabricated or implemented in a particular technology node. So when we were in the 2002, it was 130 nanometer, and just after in a 4 years, coming to 2006, it is reduced by half. So this is how we are increasing or day and day advancing ourselves. And now in 2020, these L of the this length of the transistor, it is reduced to even 14 nanometer. So a great advancement is done in this. This is a Semiconductor Industry Association roadmap. This was updated in 1998. This is just to show you that how we are moving. Like if I talk of the 1998, we were at the 180 nanometer technology. In 1999, we came to 130, then 35, but not this is 35. This node was not so much popular, and the designers came to another node. Then transistors per centimeter square, see 6.2 million transistors in 1999, and within a 15 years, 390 million transistors per square centimeter area of a chip. A huge advancement in this, and a big density increment basically has done. Similarly with the local clock frequency, see it was 2100, or even in 1998 hardly it was 1250 megahertz, but coming to 21st century, then start of the 21st century, we come to 10,000 megahertz, 10 times nearly improved from the within the 4 years only. Similarly, the reduction in the power supply. See, earlier we were using between 1.5 to 1.8. Now the transistors are working merely on a zero point 0.4 volt, 0.5 volt power supply. So it gives a huge reduction in the power consumption also. So that is how we can say that the scaling trends will allow the electronic market to growth at 15% every year. So you can think of that within a 10 years where the technology will stand. Now the question comes, why the VLSI design? We are discussing it again and again, but it is of a very a big significance of this question is there, that why VLSI? So if I talk of a large scale integration, then in the large scale LSI, the size was less. We are getting in the comparison to the large scale integration. If I compare the VLSI, then size is much smaller. We have came to that much of a advancement. Speed is increased many folds. Power is reduced drastically. So these are some factors that why VLSI design, because these are the three concern of the users and the customers or consumers even. They need a small size devices which will be handheld, portable. The speed of the device should be very high so that the computation speed can be high. Power consumption should be less because the battery operated devices should not get charged again and again, and the cost of battery should not be included into the device in every few months. So this is a one. And yes, after achieving all these things, it also reduces the manufacturing cost. Why? Because there is no manual assembly required. Everything is with the machinery. Once the setup is being established, then it has to be only maintained, and the maintenance cost is only there. It will not have any uh, other additional cost into it. So this is how we can say that why the VLSI design is of so importance and why the world is running with this VLSI technology. Now these are the different design styles. As we were discussing in the start at the with the BJT, we were mostly using the TTL logic, and it has the set of steps by which the circuit is being designed and the chip is being fabricated. But now if I talk of the VLSI design style, in this the integrated circuit is sectioned into four parts broadly. The first is the user programmable, which again has a PLD as a programmable logic devices. It is again divided into four parts. This is programmable array logic, programmable logic array. This is SPLD, then the CPLD. Then it has a another segment which is again very popular. It's a FPGA. FPGA is again have a gate, multiplexers, lookup tables into it. Then the second segment of the integrated circuit is semi-custom design by which we make a ASICs. Then third is again a full custom ASICs. And then a very recent is the system on chip, which we also call a SoC devices. So these are the broad four areas of the VLSI integrated circuits. Now one by one we will discuss these. So these are the four. I'll start one by one. Introduction to all I will be covering over here. Now if I talk of the programmable logic, where PLDs and FPGAs are there in a broader form. PLDs stands for programmable logic devices. FPGA stands for field programmable gate arrays. So they have certain features into it, like the pre-manufactured components with programmable interconnect. Means there are some pre-manufactured components given to the user, and these pre-manufactured components have a programmable interconnect which is open at the user end. As per the application, user can reprogram those interconnect again and again. So it is like that one IC or a one PLD can be used for a several application. Then CAD tools greatly reduce the design effort. So through the CAD tools, we can program this interconnect. It is not like that we have to manually program this. It has a low design cost because already pre-manufactured components are being given, and only programmable fuses need to be connected wherever required. It has a low NRE cost also. Now what is this NRE? NRE basically stands for non-recurring engineering cost. And this non-recurring engineering cost, this refers to the one-time cost to research, design, develop and test any new product or the product enhancement. So in the PLDs or the programmable logic, this NRE cost is very low. And once we budget for a new product, NRE must be considered to analyze if a new product is a profitable or not. So in this way, this is defined as. It has a high unit cost also. Now what does this unit cost means? Unit cost is a total expenditure which is incurred by a company to produce, store and sell one unit of a particular product or a service. So it too has a high unit cost. And lower performance. Here this phase. Lower performance as comparison to ASIC but not with the general digital design. It is better than the general digital design which we were talking of with the TTL logic. But if we compare these programmable logics with the ASIC, then obviously they have a lower performance. Now, if I compare the logic circuits, then one side I have a standard logic circuits which we are conventionally designing with as a digital design, and once we on the other side we have a programmable logic circuits. So the standard logic circuits realize single function or set of functions like what we do in a digital electronics. We have, say, suppose we have to implement a one 4-bit adder, so it will only work as a 4-bit adder. But here what is happening, if we are working it with a programmable logic circuit, possibility of realizing the various features because you have a programmable fuses or the switches over there. And by those programmable switches or interconnects, the number of functions can be implemented on with a single logic circuit. Then there is a no possibility of changing. Yes, because once the circuit has been designed, if the adder is designed, it will work as a adder. It won't be working as a divider or multiplier. But this is reconfigurable. So again, we have a good thing in our hand. It requires a more dubbing time and it has a less dubbing time. More interconnections and input outputs are required. Here we have a fewer input outputs and fewer connections. Only the switching needs to be done between the interconnect. Then standard logic circuits have a high standby and switching current, and this will lead to a high power consumption also. But the programmable logic circuits have a lower standby and switching current, so it has lesser power consumption in comparison to the standard logic circuits. It has no design security, but it provides the design security also. It is not flexible because once the circuit is designed, it will only work for that. But it has a flexibility. This is the greatest advantage of the programmable logic circuits. We don't have any tool for automation for the standard logic circuits, which we built up with the BJTs, or we can say with the logic gates even. But in a programmable logic circuits, automation is possible. Then the non-recurring engineering cost, NRE and time to market, this is more in the case of a standard logic circuit. But when we talk of a programmable logic circuit, then its NRE is less, its time to market is also less, and because why this time to market is less, as only reprogramming is required. We have already built a one block, or we can say a one module, and that module is only reprogrammed again and again, so the time to market is less. But here the single change require a redesign, means if we have to change a one particular feature of the circuit or one particular connection of the circuit, then also redesigning need to be considered. So this is how we compare the standard logic circuits with the programmable logic circuits. Now these are the FPLDs. FPLDs, the field programmable logic devices. They are further categorized into 4 as we were discussing few slides back. The PLA, PAL, CPLD. These all are under the PLDs, which are the programmable logic devices. And the different from these three is the FPGA, field programmable gate arrays. So now we come with that what is the CPLD, which is a complex programmable logic device. And it is an, when we talk of the CPLD, it uses less board space. It has an improved reliability and a reduced cost. It contains a multiple logic blocks which communicate with one another via interconnects or the routers which are programmable. Means reprogram can be done. It's a reconfigurable type of a structure. The routing of these blocks is easy, and CPLDs are great at handling wide and complex gating at a good speed. For example, for 5 nanosecond, which is equivalent to 200 megahertz. So up till this, we can have a speed of a CPLD. This is a structure of the CPLD. This is a one block of this architecture, a one block of CPLD, which consists of say 50 to 200 gates into it. Here are the interconnects, and the fuses we have to arrange, and we have to program it with the connections need to be programmed that which interconnect should be connected to which. Then we have a gate arrays. It is a and or gate arrays. Then we have a flip-flops over here. So this is a three-step architecture. And at the outside, this black are the input-output pins. See, this is like this. Several PAL-like block interconnected via switch matrix. See, this is your PLDs. In between, we have a interconnect, and then we have a IO blocks, means input-output blocks. And inside a one block, we have several macro cells, and each macro cell is having this architecture into it. So you can look for that such a wide structure we are getting, and how many features can be implemented or programmed into it. And it has a very simple structure also. It's having a repetitive type of a structure. Both sides we have an input output pins. In between the interconnect is there, so that a one PLD can be connect with the other PLD, and each PLD has a input output interface near to it. It's not like one PLD is here and the input output pins are here and a log interconnect is needed. No, this is not a case. And so why we should use a CPLD is it has a ease of design, the lower development cost, product revenue is more, reduced board area. Yes, if we compare to the printed circuit board, it has a much reduced area. It is reconfigurable and reprogrammable and flexible. Flexible in the sense of the functions which can be programmed into it. So this is a one category with the PLDs. Now the advanced category, or we can say another one which is more popular than the CPLDs, are the field programmable gate array. So firstly we should understand why this name is given to this. What is the meaning of this field and programmable gate array? So if we talk of a field, in general, if we talk of a field in in technology or industry, field is like the outside of the company. Like in the field, in the open, we say. That might mean remote staff or offices, or it might mean other companies such as channel partners, customers, means something which is in open, that is called as a field. But here, if we talk of the FPGA, here field means customers, means programmable gate array for the customers. Then programmable name is given because it is capable of being programmed. That's why this name programmable is given to it. Gate over here is a short form for the logic gate, which is a hardware circuit that performs a logical operations by the binary input and binary output. So because it is using the gate, so that's why logic gates it is using. So the gate word is over here, and the array, because it is a array is a group of elements that form a complete unit. So it is structured in a form of array, and that's why this name is given FPGA, field programmable gate array. This is the general architecture of the FPGA. These are known as this bigger blocks. These are known as the CLBs, configurable logic blocks. And in between we have this switch block. These switch blocks are made up of MOSFETs. 6 MOSFETs are mostly used to implement this switch blocks, and with the connections, basis on the connections and on and off condition of these MOSFETs, these configurable logic blocks are connected to each other. These at the outer side, these are the input output pads. So it's a symmetrical type of array which we are getting over here. And much simpler than the CPLD. So this is a journal architecture and it's all programmable. Whatever be the function we have to build up with the FPGA, for that it is programmed, and the language which is used to program the FPGA is the VHDL or a Verilog language, means hardware description languages are used to program these FPGAs. Now there are certain pros and cons always present in all type of units. So there are some pros in the FPGAs, and on the other hand there are some cons also. So the pros are that these are reasonably cheap at low volume. Means when we are talking of a low volume parts like a small circuit which have a few features, then these are cheap. But if we are talking of a high volume parts, then they are more expensive even than a ICs. Then it has a short design cycle, means within a 1 second the programming time is there. If you are very good in the programming, then just by a one click you can change the feature or change the functionality of the circuit. It's a reprogrammable and large capacity, 100 millions of gates or even more are available on a one single board of FPGA. So a good number of functions can be performed by a single board. This is more flexible than the PLDs and more compact than the MSI and SSI architecture. So these are some pros of the FPGAs. But on the other hand, it has some disadvantages too. Lower capacity, speed and higher power consumption if compared with the ASICs. Then these are some uh, properties on which it is not on a good part, and suboptimal mapping of logics into the CLBs. Oftenly 60% of utilization is done, means the overall architecture into a one FPGA board, it is not 100% utilized. It is merely 60 to 70% get utilized only. It works on a lower clock frequencies, and PLDs may be faster than FPGAs for designs they can handle. Means FPGA, if you are programming it for a many number of features or functions into it, then probably it can have a slower speed in comparison to PLDs. And it needs a sophisticated tool to map design to FPGA. Means particular tools are needed for this, like Xilinx, like Altera, and there are many others. Those are needed to map this FPGA board with the programming, and then the function of the FPGA can be changed. So that is again a one thing which is used to it. And those tools are not openwares, it's costly to be purchased. So now when we talk of, in a short, if we are talking of a programmable logic, it's a pre-manufactured components, programmable interconnects are there. CAD tools reduce the design effort, they make the design easy also. Low design cost, low NRE, high unit cost, lower performance. So these are some features of this. This is the CPLD which we have seen. These are the uh, FPGAs which we are discussing so far. So this is how the one segment of the VLSI, or we can say one segment of the ICs is there. Now we are moving to the second segment category, that was the semi-custom ASICs. This we have already discussed about it, what are the advantages of programmable logic, so need not to discuss again and again, but you can have a one look on this. Now, how to cope up with the complexity of this? So there are certain, at certain level, the different tools are present, like the electronic design automation tools, which are known as a EDA. It is having a two category. One is known as a computer aided design, which is for the front end design, and the computer aided engineering. This category is for the back end. So it is again having a, like for a simulation we use Synopsys, Cadence, and then HSIM, SSPICE, Magma. There are a number of tools available at the simulation level. For the synthesis and implementation, we have again Synopsys, Xilinx, Altera, Magma. So this is again a list of the EDA tools is there. For timing analysis and verification, we have a prime time, formality from the synopsis, Magma provide DRC and LVS, Mentor provides model sim. So these are again the different tools for this. At the physical design level, we have Cadence Virtuoso, we have a Magic, L-Edit, Astro. So certain different EDA tools are available at each and every level. And these tools are helpful in reducing the complexity of the design and the analysis of the design. Now this is a journal tool flow for the PLDs. So this is a portion which is carried out by the software, and this is a portion which is on the PLD chip, and these are interfaced in between with the download cable. That software has to be interfaced with the PLD chip. Now the design entry, this is done with the hardware description languages, say VHDL, Verilog, AMS and few others. Then the synthesis took place. Here we give a device type, the constraints, implementation. Here we go with the gate level circuits. Floor planning is also mentioned into the implementation. Then the bit stream, here the user constraint file is generated and it's the input to the bit stream. Then this software is mapped with the PLD chip. And once mapping with the PLD chip, now it is coming to the configurable memory, then the configurable switch matrix, like what the configuration or what the programming need to be done, what connections are required. On that basis, the transistors, switches or multiplexers, they are being programmed. Then the configurable logics, LUTs or gates, flip-flops, they are being programmed. So this is the user programmable, or we can say the first category of the integrated circuits, FPGA PLDs, we have completed. Now we will discuss about the semi-custom ASICs. ASIC stands for here application specific integrated circuit. So it is divided again into two, like one is a semi-custom, it's a totally different field. Other is a full custom, and then we come to a system on chip. So moving further to the basics of the ASIC. ASIC stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuits. It has a constrained design using pre-designed components. Means a few library has already been maintained. A modules, or we can say the pre-manufactured components are already there, and that's why it is called as a semi-custom design. Means few modules are present, and if we are working on an EDA tool with the semi-custom design, then in the library, the component models are already being made. And the programmer or the designer have to only pick and drop that. So we are only dragging and dropping those and making a complete circuit. So it is basically reducing the time also. But on the other side, if we will be looking for, say, the semi-custom design will have a medium performance, because we are not using a totally new transistor or component which is being developed for some specific application. We are choosing the already built up models which are lying in the library, and we are only picking those models. So the performance is not at its highest, but obviously the medium performance can be gained, and mostly we are working on this only. As see, if one phone is coming to us, see if I talk of a Redmi Note 6, then 6 Pro, then 7, then 7 Pro, 8, then 8 Pro, then what's like, how it is coming in such a small time. Whole hardware is not changing. It's not like that that if you are using a Redmi Note 6 and if you are using a Redmi Note 8, if you will open them, you will not see that each and everything has been changed. No, some particular modifications have been done only, and a new phone is being launched. So this is basically a semi-custom approach where the design time is very less, and so the market time will be more. It has a low design cost also. Its NRE cost is high. We have seen in the PLDs that the NRE cost of the PLDs are low, but here it is high. Now if I compare these ASICs with the FPGAs, because these are very near to, Like ASIC are a application specific integrated circuit. FPGA, we can say that it can have a more it's a reconfigured module. So if I compare these two, the design must be seen for expensive and time consuming fabrication in semiconductor foundry. Why? Because for each and every application, a specific circuit has been developed. And here, if I'll talk of a FPGA, it is bought off the shelf and reconfigured by designer themselves. Like the designers themselves can reconfigure for the new functionality. But with the ASIC, it has to be fabricated. The foundry need to be taken care of this. A new chip is fabricated. It's not reprogrammable or reconfigurable. It is, if I talk of a ASIC, it is designed all the way from behavioral description to the physical layout. Means from the system specification to the final product and product. It is designed at each and every step. But if I talk of the FPGA, physical layout is of no concern over here. It's a board, already made board. Number of functions are there and it has a certain input output ports. It has certain features into it. And by just programming those, we can configure a device. So both the approaches are a bit different. But there is still a balance between the two. ASIC, if I say, it has a high performance, low power and low cost in high volumes. But if I talk of FPGAs, it is off the shelf, it has low development cost, it has a short time to market, reconfigurability. So both type of boards, or we can say both type of techniques, have its own advantages and hence they have a balance. For few applications, ASICs are better. For few area, FPGAs are better. Now, which way to go? Like when, how we will see that what is a better for us? FPGA need to be taken, or we should consider ASIC for us. So if I talk of FPGA, it has a flexibility of software because reprogrammable and plus speed of the hardware design. So this is what the one plus point is there with the FPGA. When I talk of a ASIC, it has a tailor-made on demand for specific applications. Means it comes with the on-demand specific applications. And if I compare it with the certain parameters like time to market, FPGA have a short time to market, and but ASIC take a long time because they are designed from a very first step to the last one. High volume unit cost, FPGA is high, having a high cost, and ASIC for a high volume unit cost will be low. Flexibility after manufacturing, ASIC never gives any flexibility. Once it is fabricated, it will only function for that particular application. But FPGA have a high flexibility. Performance, FPGA have a medium performance, whereas ASIC will gives you a high performance. Density, FPGA is a medium density and ASIC with a high density. Power consumption, it's a big constraint. You can think from this point of view, though ASIC will consume a low power, but FPGA consumes a high power. And design flow complexity, FPGA have a medium design flow complexity, but ASIC have a high design flow complexity. Turnaround time, it takes hours and it may take months to design and turn around. So this is how, depending upon that what type of a function need to be developed or what type of a application need to be developed, we can choose out of the two whether FPGA will be our choice or ASIC will be our interest. So with the ASIC, we have completed the semi-custom design approach where we are using pre-developed modules or a pre-developed components and we are integrating them on a single chip for making a particular application to run. Now the third category comes out as a full custom design. Full custom design means it need to be the design which need a customization from the very start or a step one. That is known as a full custom design. Means each circuit element carefully handcrafted. Means each and every circuit element, each and every model of the component is again generated as per the system specification. No use of any library. Here library means the tool library which we use, which we have in all the EDA tools. So with the full custom design, engineers or the designers, they don't take any component from the library which is already built in into the CAD tools and or the EDA tools rather. Each and every element, they make it a new one. Huge design effort. Obviously it requires a huge design effort because starting from the transistor and ending to a system, each thing is redesigned. So it's design, high design, and NRE cost is also high. But it gives a high performance. Why? Because it is not totally customized as per the demand or as per the specification for the system being given. So it gives the high performance. It is used for a high volume application. Such type of a design approach we don't use for a low volume applications. And the design productivity is low. So these are some features of the full custom design. Now next comes the system on a chip, which is known as a SoC. This is a great revolution, rather I say it's a great revolution when we come with a system on a chip, because it combines the idea of a system on chip is to combine several large blocks into a one chip, like pre-designed custom cores, ASIC logics, programmable logics, analog circuits. They all are integrated on a one single wafer, and hence the name system on a chip means a one chip is carrying a complete entire system. Like in this you can see for this, it has all the units integrated on a one single chip. But what are the issues for this? Keeping design cost low. This is a big issue, that integrating so many modules onto a one single chip increases the complexity, but still designer should keep the design cost low. This should be taken care of. A big concern that it should not happen that we are integrating all the parts or modules on a one chip, but when this chip will be ready for the market, then its cost is much more higher than the individual cost of these parts, these modules. So then it will be of no use. And very difficult or a very big challenge is the verifying correctness of the design. That is a big problem, because now number of different various modules are being added onto a one chip. So to verify the correctness of this design, whether the chip is functioning properly or not, the troubleshooting of this, these things are very difficult. So these are some open issues for the system on a chip. So now when I compare the design process, this is the conventional TTL logic design process which was taken care when the BJT was in a big demand. And this is how we do with the programmable logic. So with the TTL, we have a design specification, then the truth table need to be drawn, Boolean expression and its minimization, then implementation, then again at the implementation, uh, several things are to be taken care of. But if we talk of a programmable logic, the things have become very easy. Like if we have a design specification and the then we go for the design description, then the software, and just fuse and map. So the device is ready to use. So only with the few programming steps and interfacing between the software and the hardware, we can have the device ready for use. So if, at last, if I talk for the goal of the IC designers, we have now, up till now, we have seen that what different kind of ICs are available, how they are characterized, on which applications they will be good, and what are their benefits and what are the limitations of those. Now we will discuss about it. What is the goal of the IC designer? Now, the first goal is to meet the market requirement. This is very important. What the demand is coming, the supply will be specific to that only. The satisfying the customer needs. This is again a big concern, that what the customers are needing, what the feedback of the previous device or previous system is coming. On the basis of that, the modifications are carried out. Then These things, if we are talking of the customer needs, then beating the competition, increasing functionality, each and every person wants that with a one gadget, he or she can explore number of things. Then reducing the cost. Obviously, nobody will pay lakhs or even more than that for different for various gadgets. They always look to their pocket first, and these all things are achieved by the next generation silicon technologies, new design concepts and tools, high level of integration. And this is what these things are giving the roadmap to the future. They are opening the path of the future trends, that how the VLSI field or the industry will go in the future and how it will look like. So this is all for today. Thank you so much.